The rain was pouring that day, almost like the sky itself wanted to cry with her. Agnes stood by the window of her tiny one-bedroom apartment, fingers curled around the curtain, watching the streets blur beneath the heavy downpour. Behind her, a suitcase sat zipped shut. She wasn't going anywhere this time. He was. Again, Joshua had left with barely a word, just a sigh, a muttered excuse, and that familiar silence. 10 times, she'd watched him walk away. 10 times, she'd stood exactly like this, waiting for a sound that never came. A door opening, a key turning back in the lock, something to prove he regretted it. But Joshua never looked back. They met when Agnes was just 23, wild-eyed and soft-hearted, working at a flower shop that smelled like lavender and damp soil. Joshua came in on a Thursday, asking for lilies, the kind that meant renewal. She should have seen it then. He always needed a fresh start. Back then, it had felt romantic. Now, it just felt exhausting. Every time he vanished, he left behind a mess, unpaid bills, unanswered calls, and a piece of her heart that she had to tape back together. And every time, somehow, she'd forgive him, because Joshua had a way of saying sorry with his eyes before he ever opened his mouth. He had that boyish grin that made her forget all the ways he had broken her. But not this time. She hadn't seen Joshua into years, not since the last fight, the final vanishing act. Agnes remembered that day with painful clarity. He'd said she was suffocating him, that her love felt like chains. He needed air, he said, needed to breathe. But she hadn't been holding him down, she'd only been holding on. Now, she was 29, older in spirit than in years, and finally learning how to breathe without him. It had taken time, therapy, nights crying into her pillow, days where her chest felt like it would cave in from all the loneliness. But she'd survived. And then Frank came along. Frank was nothing like Joshua. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He didn't disappear when things got hard. Frank was steady. He was present. He listened, even when her voice trembled with doubt. He didn't try to fix her pain. He just held her hand through it. She'd met him at a bookstore, reaching for the same novel. A story about a woman who lost everything and found herself again. Their fingers brushed, and he'd smiled, that kind of smile that didn't ask for anything in return. It was the first time she hadn't felt pressure to be anyone but herself. Lola, her best friend since childhood, had been skeptical at first. "You sure you're ready?" she asked over coffee one day, stirring too much sugar into her mug. "Sometimes when you've been burned for so long, you forget what warmth is supposed to feel like." Agnes nodded then, but inside, she wasn't sure. She was scared. Scared that Frank was too good, that she'd somehow ruin this too. But he never made her feel like she was broken. He treated her past with kindness, not jealousy. Then came the proposal. Frank didn't go down on one knee. He didn't throw a grand gesture. He just looked at her one evening, while they were making dinner together, and said, "I want to build something with you, something that lasts." And she said yes, not because she was trying to forget Joshua, not because she needed someone, but because, for once, she believed she deserved something good. The wedding was small, just a few friends, some laughter, and a breeze that smelled like spring. Lola stood beside her, holding her hand before she walked down the aisle. And as she stood there, staring at Frank, something in her heart settled. He didn't have Joshua's spark, but he had something else: consistency, trust, love that didn't make her question her worth. She didn't know Joshua was in the back of the church that day, watching, standing behind a pillar like a ghost of all her yesterdays. He looked older, thinner, like the world had chewed him up and spat him out, but he didn't interrupt. He just watched, because maybe even he knew this time, he'd lost her for good. After the ceremony, Agnes felt a quiet peace settle over her like a warm shawl, the kind that doesn't scream happiness, but whispers it gently into your soul. Her fingers were laced with Frank's, the gold band still foreign on her skin, cool, but solid. She stole glances at him during the reception, marveling at how he never looked away. His eyes never wandered. He was there in every moment, present like sunlight. Lola leaned in during the slow dance, her voice soft in Agnes's ear. "You look like someone who finally stopped waiting." Agnes smiled. "Maybe I did." The music played on, laughter filled the air, and somewhere between the toast and the cake, she caught a flicker of movement near the exit doors. Her breath caught. For a second, just a second, she thought it was him again. That face she'd memorized in pain, those shoulders, that carried so much charm and so little commitment. But the figure vanished into the night. She didn't say anything to Frank, didn't want to ruin the moment with ghosts. But that night, when they got home just the two of them, her makeup washed away, the dress hung carefully in the closet. Agnes lay beside her new husband in silence. Frank rubbed her shoulder gently, his voice calm. You all right? She nodded, just thinking about him. Her breath hitched, but she didn't lie. Yeah, a little. Frank didn't flinch. He kissed her temple and said, You don't have to pretend he never existed, Agnes. I'm not in competition with your past, just walking with you through your future. Her eyes burned at that, because Frank never once tried to erase her scars. He just kissed around them. But Joshua didn't vanish for long. 3 weeks into her marriage, she got the letter. Folded neatly, no return address. Handwritten in that slanted, almost careless way he used to scribble notes on napkins and backs of receipts. I saw you. You looked happy. I don't even know if this is a mistake or just life punishing me, but I wanted you to know. I never stopped loving you. I just never knew how to stay. It knocked the air right out of her chest. She read it twice, 3 times, then tucked it into the drawer of her nightstand like it was something shameful, something sacred. She didn't tell Frank, not yet. Not because she wanted to hide it, but because she didn't even know what to do with it. It was like hearing the ghost speak for the first time in years and realizing it still knew your name. Lola found out first. She came over for wine and ended up reading the letter while Agnes was in the kitchen. When she came back, Lola had it in her hand, brows furrowed. You weren't gonna tell me? Agnes sat slowly. I didn't know what to say. What is there to say? That he's still watching you, still trying to crawl his way back into your head, into your life. Agnes swallowed hard. I'm married now. It doesn't matter. But it does, babe. Because part of you still flinched when you saw that handwriting. Don't lie. She didn't. The next morning, Frank found her at the kitchen table, staring at her coffee. He slid into the chair across from her and asked gently, What did he say? Agnes blinked. How did you? You've been quiet since the wedding. Not sad. Just heavy, like something's sitting on your chest. And last night, you whispered his name in your sleep. She looked at him, terrified she'd hurt him, but he just reached for her hand. Tell me, whatever it is, I can handle it. And so she did. She read the letter out loud, voice shaking, expecting him to grow cold, expecting a crack in the calm. But Frank just nodded slowly. Closure, he said. He's looking for his. That doesn't mean you owe him yours. Agnes felt something shift inside her then, a weight lifting. You don't hate me? For what? For having a heart that still remembers pain? No, Agnes. I love you more for it. And right there, in that moment, she knew she had made the right choice. But Joshua wasn't done. It started with the voicemail. Agnes didn't recognize the number at first. It was an out-of-state area code, one she didn't have saved. She let it ring, assumed it was spam, until her phone buzzed a minute later with a notification. One new voicemail. She played it. A T first. There was only silence, then a soft breath, then his voice low, almost like he didn't believe he had the right to speak. Agnes, I know I shouldn't be calling. I know it's too late, but I had to hear your voice, even if it's just your voicemail. I messed up. I know that. I know you've moved on. You look beautiful with him, by the way. Like someone who's finally being loved the way she deserves. But if there's even a sliver of you that ever thinks of me, I'm staying at the Ridge Motel, room 11, for 1 week. After that, I'll go for good. I swear. She sat frozen, phone in hand, replaying the message again, just to be sure she hadn't imagined it. He was here, in town, watching, waiting. She wanted to scream, or cry, or throw something against the wall. Instead, she just stood up, walked to the bathroom, and stared at herself in the mirror. Her face looked tired again, like a past she'd buried had dug itself up in the middle of the night and crawled back into her reflection. She didn't tell Frank. She didn't know how to. That night, as he lay asleep beside her, his breathing deep and peaceful, Agnes sat up in bed with her arms wrapped around her knees. Her mind wouldn't shut off. 10 times he left her. 10 times she forgave him. Why was the ghost of him still holding her hostage? Lola called the next day, as if she could sense it. He reached out again, didn't he? Agnes whispered. Voicemail. He's in town. Lola didn't yell. She just went quiet, then said, Do not go. I wasn't planning to. I'm serious, Agnes. Don't even drive past that motel. But of course she did. She told herself it was just curiosity. Just closure. She didn't stop. She didn't get out of the car, but her eyes locked on room 11 as she passed by. A dim light glowed behind the drawn curtain. She saw a silhouette pacing slowly. Joshua. Later that night, she dreamed about him. Not in the way she used to, when she missed him. This time, she saw herself banging on doors, trying to get him to stay. And he just smiled and vanished into the dark, like he always did. Like he wanted her to chase. Agnes woke up, sweating, her chest tight. Frank stirred beside her, half awake. You okay? Yeah, just a bad dream. He reached for her. Come here. She curled into him, feeling guilt nibble at her heart like 1,000 little teeth, because even in her peace, even in her happiness, Joshua still had the power to shake her. The next afternoon, she made a decision. She drove to the motel again. This time, parking the car, she walked to room 11, stood in front of it for what felt like years, then knocked. The door opened, and there he was, Joshua, thinner, messier, tired in a way that no sleep could cure. But his eyes lit up like she'd brought him back to life just by showing up. Agnes, he breathed, stepping aside to let her in. She didn't move. I'm not coming inside. His smile faltered. You came though. I came to say goodbye. Properly. Joshua's throat bobbed as he swallowed. You look happy. I am happy. With him? Yes. Frank loves me without conditions. Without leaving. Without making me feel like I have to beg for scraps. Joshua looked down. I know. I was an idiot. I thought love meant always running because I didn't think I deserved it. You were right. You didn't. Silence stretched between them, thick and painful. He finally said, do you ever think of what we had? Sometimes. But mostly I think of who I had to become because of you. And then she turned, walked away, and didn't look back. She didn't hear him call her name. Didn't hear the door click shut. She drove straight home, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel broken. She felt free. It rained again that evening, soft and steady like a heartbeat. Agnes stood in the kitchen chopping vegetables, while Frank set the table, humming under his breath. It was just a normal night, quiet, ordinary, domestic. But for Agnes, it felt monumental. Because today, she had buried something. Not someone, not love, but the version of herself that had been waiting. The version who checked her phone for texts that never came. Who stayed quiet to keep a man from leaving. Who confused chaos for passion. That woman was gone now. Frank glanced at her from across the table. You're lighter, he said simply, like he'd felt the shift without needing to ask. I said, goodbye, she replied. He nodded once. Was it hard? No, she said truthfully, and surprised herself. It was overdue. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, until Frank reached for her hand. Thank you, he said. For what? For choosing me, and for trusting love again. Agnes smiled and squeezed his hand. Thank you for giving me a reason to. The next few weeks passed quietly. Agnes returned to her daily routine, working part-time at the library, doing pottery on weekends, spending time with Lola. Life didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became steady. And she started to believe that was even better, until Lola burst into her kitchen one Saturday morning, breathless and pissed. You are not going to believe this. Agnes blinked, half asleep, with her coffee in hand. What? Lola dropped her phone on the counter, already open to a photo. Joshua's back on social media. Guess what he posted? Agnes hesitated, but curiosity won. She looked. It was a photo of a motel mirror, fogged up, a heart drawn into it with the words, some goodbyes are just the start of a better story. Below, the caption, she came. She looked. She remembered. Agnes stared at it, cold rising up her spine. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Lola snapped. He's acting like you came crawling back or something. Like he's the tragic hero in some broken romance. Agnes clenched her jaw. He's rewriting the ending. Frank walked in just then, keys in hand. Everything okay? Agnes turned her phone face down and forced a smile. Yeah, just internet nonsense. But it wasn't nothing, because even now, even with no power left over her, Joshua still found a way to push into her peace, to try and drag her story back into his. That night, she told Frank the truth, showed him the post, read him the caption. Her voice was steady, but something in her chest trembled. Frank read it in silence, then looked up at her with calm eyes. Do you want me to say something to him? Agnes shook her head. No, I just want to understand why he's doing this, why he keeps pulling me back into a world I've left. Frank shrugged gently. Because you moved on. And that's the part he never expected. He thought you'd always wait. He really thinks that me showing up to say goodbye was some romantic moment. He's romanticizing the loss because the truth is too ugly to sit with. Agnes nodded slowly. I hate that he still tries to write my story for me. Frank leaned forward, his voice soft but certain. Then take the pen back. And she did. That night, she opened her laptop and wrote something raw and honest. Not for Joshua, not even for the world, but for herself. 10 times I forgave, and 10 times you vanished. Not once did you fight for me, not once did you stay. You left me to clean up the mess you called love. And still, I survived. I rebuilt myself without you. And now, someone else holds me like I'm made of something whole. I said I do to a man who meant it, a man who shows up. And I will never again mourn a ghost who kept choosing to disappear. She posted it anonymously on a blog she hadn't touched in years. Just left it there like a stone at the edge of a river, solid, unmoved, and she slept better that night than she had in a decade. 3 days after the post went live, Agnes's inbox flooded, not from strangers, from women, dozens of messages, some long, some barely more than a sentence, all echoing a similar pain. They had known a Joshua too, maybe not the same man, not in name, but in shape. Men who vanished and returned, men who treated love like a leash, men who fed on forgiveness until there was nothing left to give. Agnes read every single one. One woman wrote, I never thought anyone else would understand. You put into words what I've carried for years. Another said, I left him, but I still feel like he owns part of my story. Thank you for showing me I can take it back. Agnes didn't cry, not out of sadness anyway, but because something powerful bloomed in her chest. Validation, connection, a reminder that healing didn't have to be quiet, that her pain wasn't just hers. It was part of a much larger ache shared by so many. Frank found her sitting on the floor of the living room, laptop in her lap, tears drying on her cheeks. You okay? He asked gently, crouching down beside her. I think, she whispered, for the first time in my life, I'm more than okay. He smiled, pulled her close. You're doing something real, Agnes. And she was. Lola came over that evening with 2 bottles of wine and a bucket of opinions. So are we finally burning that motel to the ground or just leaving a strongly worded Yelp review? Agnes laughed, a sound that felt like light cracking through years of fog. I think I'm done giving him even that much energy. Good, Lola said, raising her glass. To no more ghosts, to love that stays. They clinked glasses, but Joshua, he didn't take the hint. The next message came directly to her email. Subject, you turned me into a villain. It read, you make it sound like I meant to hurt you. I was lost. I loved you the only way I knew how. You chose to shame me in front of the world. You always said you understood me, but maybe you just wanted to fix me. That's not love either. Agnes stared at the screen, her hands steady, heart not racing like it used to. Lola leaned over her shoulder. You gonna reply? No, Agnes said calmly. He still doesn't get it, and I'm done explaining. She hit delete, then blocked. It was the first time she hadn't felt guilty doing it. That weekend, she and Frank took a trip, just a weekend getaway to a cabin in the hills, where the world quieted and the stars actually looked like stars. They left their phones off, brought books they barely opened, and talked for hours. One night, by the fireplace, Agnes asked him something that had been sitting at the back of her mind. Do you ever feel like you're competing with a ghost? Frank shook his head, running his fingers through her hair. No, because he left. I stayed. That's not a competition. That's a conclusion. She smiled. I don't want to talk about him anymore. Then we won't. Agnes leaned her head on his chest and closed her eyes, because for the first time in a long, long time, maybe ever, she didn't feel haunted. She felt home. Fall arrived like a gentle hush over the city, leaves crunching under boots, the air crisp with the smell of cinnamon and cold wind. Agnes found herself nesting more, baking bread she barely ate, lighting candles just to fill the house with warmth. She liked the quiet of it all. After years of chasing noise, silence now felt like healing. Frank was thriving too, in his quiet way. He never needed center stage, he was always the calm backstage hum that made everything run smoother. Some nights, he'd read while she worked on her ceramics. Some nights they'd just talk, no agenda, no wait, just being. One evening, Agnes pulled an old box out from the back of the closet, one she hadn't touched since the day she moved in with Frank. It was filled with her past: letters, receipts, dried flowers from old apologies, photos of her and Joshua that had once lived on her walls, now curled and yellowed at the edges. A piece of paper fell out. She opened it slowly. Joshua's handwriting, an old note, one she barely remembered keeping. "You love too loudly. I never know how to hold that kind of noise." She sat there, holding it like it was something radioactive. Back then, she thought it was poetry, a line from a broken man trying to make sense of the world. But now it felt like an excuse, dressed as insight. He hadn't been deep. He'd just been cruel in clever clothes. She almost threw the box away right then, but something in her stopped. She didn't want to destroy her past. She just wanted it out of her space. So she walked it outside, placed it gently in the bin, and whispered to the night, "I release you," and meant it. That week, she got an email from a publishing platform. Her blog post had been picked up. They wanted her to contribute a personal essay series, stories about heartbreak, survival, and second chances. Agnes read the offer 3 times, then showed it to Frank, who grinned and kissed her forehead. "People need your words, Agnes. Not everyone knows how to turn pain into something that helps others breathe." "I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of remembering." He held her hand. "You've already lived through it. Now you just get to tell the truth." So she wrote one story after another, honest, brutal, gentle. Each one peeled back a different layer of who she used to be. She told the world about the 10 times she forgave, not because she was weak, but because she wanted to believe love could be stronger than abandonment. She wrote about the final goodbye, about Frank, about choosing peace over passion that burned too hot and left nothing but ash. One day, while checking the blog comments, she saw one that stopped her breath. "You don't know me, but your story saved me. I packed my bags last night. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. I don't know where I'm going yet, but I know I deserve better. Thank you for reminding me." Agnes read it out loud to Frank, her voice trembling. "This is why I had to live through it, isn't it?" Frank smiled. "So someone else could survive it." Lola showed up a week later with a copy of a small online magazine that had printed Agnes's essay. "You're officially published, babe." They drank wine and toasted to new beginnings, the real kind, the ones built not from someone else's return but from your own becoming. And when the wind blew in through the window that night, it didn't feel cold. It felt like space she had finally made for herself. Winter arrived with soft snowfall and longer nights, but Agnes didn't dread the cold anymore. She welcomed it like an old friend. It gave her more reason to stay home, to burrow into quiet evenings with Frank, to breathe slower and deeper. The days didn't rush past her anymore, they unfolded gently with meaning. Her writing had taken on a rhythm now. She no longer wrote just to exhale the pain, but to understand it, to shape it into something that made sense not just to her, but to every woman who had ever sat on the edge of her bed, wondering why love always felt like a punishment. She hadn't heard from Joshua since that last email. Not a message, not a sighting, not even an accidental ripple in her piece. It was like he had finally accepted the silence, maybe even respected it. But one evening, just after Christmas, she got a call from an unknown number. She let it ring. She didn't want to answer. But something inside her, it wasn't fear, not anymore, but a curiosity so soft it almost didn't register, reached out and pressed accept. "Agnes?" The voice was hollow, smaller. "Yes. It's Frank." "Not your Frank." "My name is Frank." She froze, unsure if she heard right. I'm Joshua's brother." Her stomach dropped. "I don't mean to intrude," he added quickly. I didn't know who else to call." Agnes stepped out onto the porch, shutting the door gently behind her. "What's going on?" There was a pause. Then softly, "Joshua's in the hospital. He overdosed 2 nights ago. He's alive, but barely. He asked for you." The words settled over her like a sudden chill. She hadn't expected this, not after everything. "I'm sorry to bring this to your doorstep," Frank said. "But he kept saying your name, kept saying you were the only person who ever saw him." Agnes didn't respond for a long time. Snow started falling again, soft and quiet. "I'm married now," she said. "At last." "I know. He knows. I'm not the same person he left behind." "I believe that," Frank said gently. "But sometimes people ask for light when they're dying. And maybe you were his." She ended the call without saying yes or no. She stood on That porch. A long time, watching the snow cover the garden, the steps, her footprints, covering everything. When she went back inside, Frank was on the couch, reading. She walked up, sat beside him, curled into his side. He looked at her, sensing something in her silence. What happened? She told him everything. He didn't flinch. Didn't say no, didn't tell her what to do. Just looked at her with those steady eyes and asked, "Do you want to go?" Agnes shook her head slowly. "I don't think I do, but I feel heavy." "You don't owe him your peace, Agnes. Not now. Not after all you built." She rested her head against his chest. "I think I just needed to know how his story ends." Frank wrapped his arms around her. "And maybe now you do." She never went to the hospital, but a week later, she sent a note to Frank, Joshua's brother. She kept it short. "I hope he finds the healing I could never give him, but I won't carry his ending with me. I already survived him once. I won't go back." And that was it. Joshua didn't die, but she never heard about him again. No more emails. No more messages, just silence. And this time, it felt like peace, not absence. Agnes continued writing, loving, living. The blog turned into a book. She and Frank started trying for a baby. Lola fell in love with a woman named Casey and moved in with her. And on a quiet morning in spring, Agnes stood in her garden, hands in the dirt, sun on her skin, and whispered to herself, "I did say I do." And this time, it meant something. 2 years later, the house was filled with new sounds: tiny feet pattering across hardwood floors, giggles that bubbled like music, and the soft hum of lullabies played in the background while warm food simmered on the stove. Agnes stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching her daughter sway in the little baby swing, eyelids fluttering as sleep slowly pulled her under. Her name was Marin Frank Delaney, a name full of softness and strength, like the life she'd been born into. A life of love that stayed. Frank entered quietly behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "She looks just like you when she's stubborn." Agnes laughed softly, leaning into him. "And she sleeps like you, peaceful, unbothered by the chaos she causes." They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, the air thick with love that no longer had anything to prove. This was what she had waited for, suffered for, prayed through the ache for. Not a fairy tale, but something far more real, a life that didn't require her to break into pieces to be loved. The book had done well. More than well, actually. It resonated like wildfire. Women wrote to her daily, thanking her for saying the things they'd been too afraid to admit even to themselves. Her story became a mirror they could look into, a map for getting out. She spoke at small events, then larger ones, talked about forgiveness, not as surrender, but as reclamation. Not as something owed to those who left, but as a gift to ourselves to finally be free. Joshua's name never came up again. Not in letters, not in emails, not even in whispers. It was as if the world had closed that chapter too. Sometimes, on particularly still nights, Agnes would sit by the fireplace and think of who she used to be. The girl who stood by the window, suitcase packed, heart wide open, waiting on a man who never knew how to stay. She didn't hate her. She pitied her, loved her, thanked her, because that girl had survived, and in doing so, had made way for everything that came after. Lola still called twice a week sometimes. From the couch, sometimes from airports, her life full of movement and noise and a different kind of love. But every call ended the same way, no matter where she was in the world. "I'm proud of you, Aggie. So proud." One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the garden bathed in golden light, Agnes sat on the back porch, Marin asleep against her chest. Frank was watering the plants, singing under his breath off key. As always, she closed her eyes and let it sink in. This was what love looked like when it was real. It wasn't fireworks or dramatic tears at motel doorsteps. It wasn't unanswered texts or aching silences. It was small things, daily choices. A hand that reached out even when the lights were off. A voice that said, "I see you," and meant it. And she had found it. She had become it. Agnes kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, "When you grow up, I hope you never mistake chaos for love. And if you do, I hope you find your way back." Then she looked at Frank. He smiled, eyes soft. She smiled back, because there, in the quiet glow of a life rebuilt, she finally understood the best "I do" she ever said was to herself. The end.